Good morning. Today, Alexis and I will be speaking about optimizing your new roof with respect to the new local laws 92 and 94. We are at a particular moment in time as a city and as a country, as we know. Today, we're speaking about building codes with respect to addressing the environmental degradation that exists in the city and climate change globally. We're in the midst of a pandemic, which presents healthcare inequalities, and there's a greater sense of uncertainty in the real estate market than we've seen in a very long time. And there are much needed protests to address the racial disparities and human rights violations, which have been going on for much too long in this country. But it's my opinion that we're at an inflection point for the country, that we need better policies, we need better political will, and we need better regulations and implementation of those regulations in order to see the kind of structural change that we like to see. Last year was a very exciting year in the environmental community in New York City with the passages of local laws 92, 94, 95, and 97, which comprised the Climate Mobilization Act. And today we are speaking, of course, about the first two, the building code changes with respect to sustainable rooftops. And Alexis will get us started talking about the legal requirements for complying with that law. And then I will take it from there in terms of the economic and social opportunities which these laws present us. So without further ado, Alexis, please take it away.
Great, thanks, Rob, and thanks all for joining the call. As Rob noted, I'm an attorney at Sive, Paget & Rizal, which is a boutique environmental law firm in New York City. We focus on everything from traditional environmental matters, such as permitting and environmental impact review, to renewable energy development and energy efficiency. In particular, with the Climate Mobilization Act, we've been meeting with stakeholders and clients to develop creative but also sensible solutions to complying with the new buildings laws in New York City, including 92 and 94. So I'm very thankful to be speaking on this exciting and important topic at this time. So the local laws 92 and 94 are part of the Climate Mobilization Act passed last year, and they establish basic requirements for solar and green roof development on new buildings and buildings with substantially modified roofs. It's just generally the distinction between 92 and 94. 94 establishes the basic requirements for solar and green roofs, and 92 adds requirements for smaller residential buildings and defers the compliance deadline for some affordable housing. But generally they're kind of considered together in terms of imposing these requirements. So shown on the screen, the basic requirement is that as of November of last year, all new buildings and those with alterations where the entire roof deck or roof assembly is being replaced must provide a sustainable roofing zone on 100% of the roof. So there's a few things to unpack there as we think about compliance. So the first is, do the laws apply to your new or existing building? So if you have a new building coming online, yes, the laws apply. If you have an existing building where you're replacing the entire roof deck or roof assembly, likely yes. Historic buildings subject to LPC jurisdiction must comply, and you have to get approval by LPC before submitting for the DOB approval. Some types of affordable housing can defer compliance until 2024. Those are listed here on the slide. Notably, this does not include affordable New York buildings, former 421A, buildings. So those buildings still have to comply. DOB has additional guidance on what to submit when you are submitting your applications to DOB for new buildings or for alterations or post-approval amendments. So be sure to check out that guidance for additional details on what's required by DOB, and we'll circulate that to everyone who registered along with the slides for this program afterward. So once you understand that the laws apply to your building, you have to understand what is the extent of this sustainable roofing zone that must be covered with solar panels and or a green roof. Generally, the zone encompasses your whole roof and then is kind of whittled away by various exemptions under the law. To come up with the actual area that is eligible for coverage. So the areas of the roof that do not have to be covered with solar panels or a green roof include things that you might expect, areas required for access, mechanical equipment, stormwater management, as well as certain terraces and recreational spaces. There's also an area that is not required to comply depending on the slope and how much it can accommodate for solar, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then finally, there's kind of a catch-all provision where if there are site conditions that are unfavorable to solar or a green roof, then you can kind of make the case to DOB that those areas should not be covered. In particular, comes to mind shading would be a condition that might impact the viability of solar or a green roof system. So after that, you understand that you're covered by the law, you've got a sense of what your sustainable roofing zone is, then you have to figure out how do you comply? Do you have to install solar? Do you have to install a green roof? Both, neither. DOB has created this very helpful flow chart as to how to walk through that process. And the key points, as you'll see here, are whether you have a low slope or a high slope roof. If you have a low slope roof and a contiguous roof area of 200 square feet or greater, then you can provide solar or a green roof or some sort of combination. And that's really what Rob will talk about in detail. If not, you can provide solar if a certain amount of solar capacity can be achieved. Otherwise, you'll go for a green roof. If you have a high slope roof, this kind of arm out to the right here, and you can accommodate a certain amount of solar, then go with solar. If not, then that roof area is exempted from compliance. So that's kind of your decision tree as to how to think about compliance with local laws 92 and 94. One other element to think about in terms of what makes sense for your building, in addition to a variety of factors that Rob will talk about, is what your compliance obligations are for local law 97. So local law 97 requires buildings to meet carbon emissions caps by 2024. So there are compliance benefits with local law 97 to reducing a building's energy use, and in particular to installing and using solar power. Just a quick note on local law 97. Under the existing law, many types of affordable housing do not have to meet the emissions caps. They can instead install certain prescriptive energy conservation measures identified in the law. However, the City Council recently introduced a bill to amend local law 97 that would require more types of affordable housing to meet the emissions caps. It's still a bill, it hasn't been passed, but for those involved in affordable housing, it's a bill to watch because if you have a building that currently does not have to meet the caps, but might get swept in if this amendment passes, then you certainly have a lot to think about with Local Law 97 compliance. But your calculus as to solar versus a green roof might make more sense depending on what your Local Law 97 compliance options are. That the bill number for that Local Law 97 amendment is intro 1947 is for the current bill that's in City Council. So here, obviously, there are a variety of benefits for solar and a green roof, particularly for solar under Local Law 97. If you have solar panels on the roof and you're drawing that energy behind the meter, then you will have a reduced greenhouse gas coefficient under Local Law 97, which will very much reduce your emissions calculated under that law. Even if you install the solar panels but don't use the energy, you can still get a deduction from your building emissions just for installing those solar panels. But both with solar panels and with a green roof, they can decrease your building's energy use just by the coverage that they provide on your roof. So when you're thinking about Local Law 97 compliance or Local Law 92 compliance, make sure you take the other into consideration. Just finally, another factor to consider with Local Law 97 is the potential for emissions trading. The city is evaluating whether to instate an emissions trading scheme whereby even if you are under your 2024 or 2030 emissions cap, you may be able to trade the amount that you are under, either within the building portfolio or citywide. So that could be another factor to consider in terms of installing solar or maybe even a green roof. Even if you don't have an immediate Local Law 97 compliance obligation, it could help you with that if there's a trading scheme. So if we have any questions about the legal framework right now, we can take those before we move on to Rob's conversation about how to evaluate different compliance options and opportunities. And Rob also has a couple of poll questions for everybody to make sure you're not out getting coffee. So one question here I see is, has HPD decided that affordable housing has to comply? Will they help pay for it? I have not seen anything from HPD as to those types of affordable housing that currently have a deferral until 2024. And
to jump in, HPD does have some policies around solar, which we will cover in the next section.
It's something to keep an eye on. It's still very new, but HPD is required under the law to provide additional guidance for those certain types of affordable housing. So there should be something forthcoming one of these days.
Well, let's jump into. Oh, do we have another question here?
There's another question that's kind of more technical. Does a green roof decrease energy use more than a well-insulated white roof? So I don't know if you want to jump in with that, Rob, now, or you'll be covering something like that a little later.
The short answer is that they're pretty comparable. We can get into more at a later point in time, but quite a bit of research on this, and they're about the same. So without further questions for this section, then we're going to move on to a series of poll questions, and then there will be plenty of time for Q&A later on. So see someone just raised their hand. We're going to hold additional questions until after the presentations. So let's see. The first question we have is, has your company installed at least one of the following in the past: solar PV, a green roof, if you're not aware, or if it's not applicable to you. Allow 10 more seconds. We have a couple folks who haven't voted yet. Any last votes here? So here we have our poll results. We have still a couple trickling in. We have actually more green roofs than solar. 38% have installed a green roof, 26% solar, and it's 16 to 11 in terms of green roof to solar ratio. So we're finding actually less experience in solar than green roofs, which is fairly interesting. We have a second question. What property, or let's go ahead and launch the poll, folks can get started. What property does your company, what type of property does your company expect will require a solar or green roof for the next 12 months? New construction, existing buildings, neither, or not sure, not applicable. We want to get a sense of where folks are coming at as we are kind of talking about strategy during the next section and economic returns. A couple more seconds for voting. Right now, new construction's a little bit ahead of existing buildings. Any last votes? 5 more seconds. Okay, so here we have new construction. Actually, an even split between new construction and existing buildings. So that's quite relevant. 53% for new construction, actually now 51% for new construction, 49% for existing buildings. So an even split. We'll be talking about both. Third, what is the primary building type in your company's portfolio? Commercial, industrial, multifamily, educational, or institutional? Those are coming in. That's 60% vote threshold. All right, a couple more seconds. All right, so here we have a 40% commercial, 29% multifamily residential, and then some institutional and some education, some others. So a good mix, mostly commercial and multifamily. And our last question that we have has to do with community solar, an emerging trend. And are you familiar with the concept of community solar? Yes or no? Any last votes? Okay, so here we have about 60% are not familiar, and about 40% are familiar with community solar. So very interesting. There's a split in terms of having installed green roofs versus solar. There is, here we go, share the results. There's also a split in terms of building types. So we're going to cover all of these different areas during the next section. Really, the question when we look at local law 92 and 94 is around strategy to optimize the economic returns for the developer and owner, right? Our argument is that there's an opportunity here for property owners frequently to have better returns than they might have expected for their projects, and also to create additional community benefits where is feasible. So a little bit about us. We are New York City-based solar and green roof experts. We come in as owner's rep as well as solar developer, having more than 60 years of experience in the solar industry collectively across our team, and we're some of the early pioneers in green roof. Interestingly enough, we've been building and developing solar and green roofs for a long time, and now that local laws 92 and 94 require one or the other, then we're very excited to figure out the best ways for property owners to optimize their rooftops given the two technologies. The first question from a property owner's perspective, of course, is does a new roof trigger local law 92 and 94 based on what Alexis was telling us, and of course what the law says. If the answer is no, then it doesn't mean you don't do a solar or green roof, but there will be a return threshold about whether or not a property owner wants to include their technology in a project. Here we're talking about the answer is yes, you comply, you must comply. If the new roof triggers the law, then the sustainable roof zone must be defined. Where on the roof must a green roof or solar be installed? Once that area is defined, then shading is the first question for a roof. And if a roof is shaded out from surrounding buildings, from parapet, or rather bulkheads and other obstructions, then a green roof is really the only option. And there are green roofs that can grow quite well in the shade. So green roofs can be a fallback if solar is not feasible. If the roof gets good sunlight, then the question really is evaluating solar versus green roof, and this is where a cost-benefit comparison is necessary. So we work with property owners to conduct that cost-benefit comparison, which is really going to be the bulk of the balance of the conversation today. And then we walk property owners through design development, bidding work out, contractor selection, and provide construction administration. So really a one-stop shopping from an owner's rep perspective. So when we look at a solar versus green roof and compare the two, then a solar project gets really good, has a very strong incentive world at the city, state, and federal levels, meaning that the economics can frequently be favorable based on avoided electric costs alone or other similar types of benefits. There can be strong returns, cash out of pocket. We frequently see 10% IRR or above in the market rate world. Payback periods can be as little as 3 to 8 years. There also are no-cost solutions on the market that we'll talk about, especially around community solar. Green roofs, meanwhile, provide infrastructure benefits, reducing the size of detention tanks. It can double the rooftop lifespan and can provide educational and amenity space. There are some niche grant and property tax abatement programs, but they're really frequently of limited benefits, so I'm not going to talk about those a whole lot. So let's start by talking about solar. Two different financing approaches to consider. There is cash purchase as well as third-party financing opportunities. First, around the federal income tax credit. So we'll go through federal, state, and local incentives. The federal income tax credit covers 26% of the cost this year. It stepped down from 30% last year. It steps down to 22% in 2021, 10% in 2022. It is possible to lock in a 26% incentive level this year and build the project next year with some procurement of the system in 2020. There's a federal accelerated depreciation schedule. The full value of the asset can be fully depreciated year one, which makes a dramatic impact on returns. There also is the opportunity to fold a certain share of the roof costs into the tax credit basis of the project. This can make a substantial impact as well on returns. We've seen returns go from 6 or 7 years down to 2 or 3 years just based on increasing the tax basis of the project for a roof improvement that was going to happen anyway. Of course, that's particularly relevant given the requirements of local law 92 and 94, where there's always going to be a new roof. At the state level, NYSERDA provides a grant worth 50 cents a watt, which translates to about 15 to 20% of system costs. There's an additional incentive. That incentive is presently doubled for affordable housing projects. NYSERDA is about to relaunch a substantial pre-development grant program as well, worth up to $200,000 per project or portfolio of projects. And there also is a New York City property tax abatement worth 20% of the total cost of a project. This can include re-roofing expenses. The tax abatement is set to expire after this year. It's not too late to build a project beginning now, but otherwise this incentive, unless it's renewed at the state level, is set to sunset. A couple other considerations: billing structure is very important if a project is net metered or if it's installed behind the meter, so that there's essentially an avoided cost of the commercial rate of electricity. There's also remote net metering, which connects ahead of the meter, so you're not actually having to connect to the same electrical connection as the building. This can, depending on where the project is in kind of territory, returns actually can be higher than a behind the meter project. We can get into details on definitions and how this works at another point in time. There also is community solar, which provides an additional credit. The bidding process can be a surprising way to address costs as well. Costs are about, we see variations from 10 to 30% in terms of construction costs for a project based on comparable bids. This is because contractors may actually increase their rates based on their availability. So another important piece is looking at competitive bids when considering who's going to do the actual installation of the project. So a couple case studies to run through. Here's a project in the Bronx, 45 kilowatt system that was connected in front of the meter because we wanted to avoid a very old electrical system that could have triggered DOB or Con Ed changes to the electrical system that could have been quite costly. They were able to utilize all federal, state, and local incentives. Here we saw IRRs of 17%, the payback period of 5 years. We saw a 30% variability in pricing among qualified bids. So this was really an interesting case where some contractors had just won very large jobs and had to price this according to the opportunity cost of the build, not just in terms of what other firms saw as a normal install price. Community solar. Here we see there's the definition of community solar is a solar system built on a roof that can provide virtual credits to electrical accounts anywhere in the utility service area. So in New York City, anywhere in kind of service territory. It's typically a third-party developed structure, and projects are built at no cost to a property owner. The third party comes in, finances, and develops the project and provides all O&M services. There's a roof lease as well as energy bill savings for the property owner. We work with a partner called Oya Solar to develop projects. This is an example of a large commercial and industrial project in New York City, and we're able to actually sign up low-income tenants across the city for these projects. So affordable housing, we were starting to touch on this earlier. HPD, it's a matter of policy through its IPNAs, integrated physical need assessments, requires that assessors consider the economic returns of solar project and requires that projects with a return of 10 years or less incorporate solar into their projects. For ground-up construction, this is pretty easy to accomplish given the value of low-income housing tax credits. Then numbers can work quite well. The solar investment tax credit can be syndicated through the LIHTC investor. This is all very familiar language for affordable housing developers, and there are lots of creative ways to incorporate community solar as well into these ground-up construction projects. Retrofits, on the other hand, are very difficult to make pencil. Cash deals don't work very well without including the solar investment tax credits. and those are not readily accessible for existing buildings or even buildings going through year 15 refinancing process in most instances. So in this case, having a community solar developer come in and be able to provide no-cost solar can help with compliance and also provide additional benefits to a property owner in affordable housing space. Nice is also having a lot of developers take over through its RAD program, portfolios of buildings, and there's an opportunity here. So with respect to third-party financing, then we are working with the Services for the Underserved to develop 390 kilowatts of solar across 18 buildings at no cost to SUS. These will be third-party financed and owned. They get a one-time project management payment, a lease payment, as well as there's a 10% utility bill credit to property owners and tenants, with construction set for the end of this year. In terms of green roofs, then there are economic savings and design approaches to be able to reap benefits here as well. The benefits in general are in terms of infrastructure, amenity, space, and education. We touched on these earlier. I'm not going to go through each of these points. It's worth noting in terms of the incentives, however, that the green roof tax abatement is still in the rulemaking process, so it's not actually available to property owners, unfortunately, as well as the Green Infrastructure Grant Program that's run by DEP is extremely difficult to access. There are requirements that most property owners do not want to commit to, and therefore I would not recommend most property owners to participate. So here we have amenity space. There's a project called the Solaire in Battery Park City, which our landscape architect, Kathleen Bigwell, worked on, which is a LEED Gold building. It was completed in 2003, and it was about 4,800 square feet. This is a good example of an amenity space. It's on a high-end luxury building, and there's significant value add, of course, for tenants to be able to use their space, the rooftop space, as amenity. Here's another project that we worked on with Alfred E. Smith High School. It's a green roof, which was used for educational purposes, vocational training, scientific education, and innovation. We secured a grant for this project, and it's a great example of how green roofs in communities can really help to make an impact and provide workforce development and training opportunities. Here we worked with Hudson Company for an integrated water management grant from DEP and HPD, which is with a La Centrale project in the Bronx. We secured $500,000. So this is a good example of how green roof can actually be integrated with solar, as well as other water reuse strategies such as smart tanks for irrigation. They don't need to be looked at alone as a single infrastructure. And finally, in terms of design, then we've done quite a bit of work with affordable housing, such as this project with the Community League of the Heights at 552 Academy Street, where, given budget constraints, we really looked for cost-effective measures. A lot of property owners that are required to include a green roof are going to want the least cost solution. This is actually, it is an accessible green roof, but we looked at options such as cost-effective pavers in areas that are accessible. Use, for example, concrete pavers rather than wood decking, which requires a lot less maintenance in the long run. So to conclude, there are many avenues for generating value, both from solar and green roof projects. There are economic and social goals, as well as physical conditions that can impact the project returns. And a strategic method can help to optimize benefits of your roof. To build off of this, then, there are opportunities to have deep and sustained impact in communities, including underserved communities, but we need to be intentional about the program design and approach. So at that, we'd love to hear your questions.
Yeah, so feel free to keep keep typing in your questions in the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. We've already gotten a few in, including one kind of touching back on some of the basic requirements of the laws. So more specifically as to the type of alterations to existing buildings that will kind of sweep you into the requirements. So it's the replacement of the entire roof deck or roof assembly. So if you're doing anything above the roof deck, any sort of insulation changes to the kind of weatherizing, waterproofing membrane, where you're not replacing the entire roof deck, then the legal requirements are not triggered. It's really only when you get into the structural aspects of the roof deck or the complete roof assembly, that you have to comply with the law. But from a real kind of practice standpoint, if you are filing with DOB an application for a new building or alterations with horizontal or vertical enlargements or post-approval amendments that include changes to the kind of changes in scope encompassing roof alterations, then you must submit a form to DOB certifying your compliance with the laws or any exemptions that you think might apply. So you'll have to work with your engineers and your architects to kind of really go through those forms and understand if you must submit to DOB. But it's a new law that's on everyone's radar. So it's important to make sure you're submitting the form, even if you're explaining that you should be exempt. And as to the question about whether there's a way to kind of circumvent the law, aside from what I just described in terms of whether you really do fall within the legal requirements or not, it's also really worth considering all of the potential opportunities that Rob described, and whatever local law 97 requirements your building might have. It's a great opportunity to think about whether you could be making money off of your roof or saving money in terms of energy efficiency benefits. So
we have a question in terms of, are there liability issues to be aware of when installing a green roof, especially on an existing building? Couple answers. One is for an inaccessible green roof, then the biggest issue is structural, and a structural engineer will go and measure the size of the beams, take a look at the roof, and provide a report that must be followed by the design and installation team. And that's the biggest component. Also, for an accessible roof, then there needs to be a certificate of occupancy, a new CBO provided for the roof to make sure it's compliant with DOB requirements. A green roof's cost basis eligible even if HPD is not requiring it for your LIHTC project. More than likely, I mean, it's another cost of the building, right? So cost basis eligible for LIHTC. So I would double check with a LIHTC with your finance consultant on that piece. Great question. Could you provide more detail on how community solar can benefit in Local Law 97, considering they have panels in the property, but they're not consumer of that energy? This is a great question. Alexis, you want to start with how on-site renewables, what we know about Local Law 97, and we'll go from there on this one.
Yeah, so there's still a lot of uncertainty in the Local Law 97 context about how renewables play into your compliance. Certainly, if you have panels connected to your building behind the grid and you're directly drawing that power, that's very beneficial for your compliance, because that's energy that you're using that you're otherwise not taking from the grid. So your kind of the emissions attributable to your building are relatively low. In the community solar context, that's a little more uncertain at this point as to what sort of deduction you might be able to receive under the law. If you're not purchasing.
There will be some interesting contracts. This would go back to Alexis's expertise, but there's the opportunity for long-term power purchase agreements, which there will need to be interpretation of the law, but which are certainly in the spirit of the law to make sure that the power is actually procured by the property owner. And for a large building, up to 40% of the energy credits that are generated from a community solar project on site can be purchased by the property owner. Even if there's some ambiguity in the law right now, as those rules are still being developed, then there are some contracts which can be put in place that should be able to, I would expect would be able to comply, but those regulations are still in development. So really, we need a whole webinar just on local on 97 and renewables and where that is, because that's a really interesting area. And there's an incredible amount of value in compliance. For example, if you're coming out of pocket and you're offsetting your carbon emissions, then the value of avoiding carbon emissions can be above 7 cents per kilowatt hour, which can increase project returns by as much as 70%. It's huge. It's an enormous benefit to a project. So there are really good reasons to consider integrating a local 197 strategy into your local 194 compliance. Another question, how can the depreciation benefits be realized when the project developer is a 501c3? This is where the role of third-party finance comes into play, because a 501c3 is not going to be able to take advantage of your investment tax credit or your depreciation benefits, which are well above 30% of the value of a project, and make the difference of a project penciling. So a third party coming in, developing, that third party is going to take advantage of the solar investment tax credit and syndicate it on the market through the marketplace with a project or a series of projects can be taken much more efficiently, and then the offer, the community solar discounted electric credits, the lease payments, can then be reflective of the ability to take advantage of that solar investment tax credit. And frankly, projects can pencil out through a third-party structure when they just can't work on site for nonprofits, especially for existing buildings. A couple of technical questions. Maintenance issues for extensive green roofs, by and large, a couple of times a year, weeding, watering is important just to make sure that everything is growing right. And in the first couple establishment years, perhaps a couple additional visits, especially in the summertime, to encourage establishments and watering if there's a period of drought. Where do white roofs fit into all of this? Is that only for energy efficiency gains without much emissions reductions opportunity? White roofs can provide probably similar benefits from a carbon reduction standpoint as a green roof, perhaps a bit less over time because your white roof gets darker over time, whereas your green roof essentially is going to cool the roof in perpetuity. That being said, then the reasons for installing a green roof are usually above and beyond the carbon benefits alone. Great questions here. What are the most general ways that payback periods are being calculated across the industry? If we say solar, and I'd say it really depends on the owner. Owners have very different return requirements. Some are mission-based, and they want the project on the roof. If there's no cost to a property owner, then it's really the opportunity cost and time and effort and some legal fees to get a no-cost solar project being built on the roof. And then you can look at payback period, you can look at IRR, cash-on-cash return. It really depends on the particular property owner. But payback period is frequently a good place to start. How quickly are you going to get your money back? Also, frankly, social benefits that can be brought in. We can put a dollar figure to that, or it can help to tip the scale in terms of a community solar project and the ability to be a good steward of the community, so that community members can get discounts on their electric bills as well. Or if a green roof, for example, has an educational component to a project, workforce development opportunity, then those benefits also may be above and beyond what a solar project is able to provide, for example. What kind of legal agreements are required for community solar and what to be cautious of? A good community solar structure always provides a discount against a bill credit. That is standard. If there's some other type of, and that should be across the board starting from year one, that's a good structure for community solar. And it's because of the bill crediting system, getting a discount on the bill credits means that a property owner is pretty well always saving money. So what to be cautious of? I would say community solar is a different structure, right? So working with a project developer that is familiar with community solar and its regulations and practices in New York State, which is its own world, is very important.
So I can jump in on the question about.
Well, go ahead. Go ahead with the questions around legal agreements. And there are a couple. So Alexis, why don't you jump in, and if I have something to add, I will.
Sure. There's just a kind of a technical question on what is meant by the exemptions for terrace space and recreational space. So this gets back to what is the sustainable roofing zone? What is the area of the roof that is eligible for coverage by a green roof or solar under the law? And some of the exemptions from that coverage area are for certain terraces. And these are terraces on setbacks comprising less than 25% of the area of the largest floor plate in the building. So kind of take your largest floor plate. If you have a terrace that is larger than a quarter of that floor plate, then that area is not exempt from the sustainable roofing zone. So essentially you get kind of an area that does not have to be covered by solar and a green roof if it's a terrace and it's under 25% of the area of the largest floor plate. For recreational spaces, if it's a recreational space that is considered principal to the use of the building, then that is exempt from the sustainable roofing zone. So here's where you get into a little bit more of the nuances as to what area has to be covered, and that can, depend on how you design the building and how you're using the roof space. And those are, if you have a new building that you're designing from scratch, then obviously you can kind of take those factors into consideration. If you have an existing building, then it's a little bit more questionable as to kind of the changes that you can make, and whatever sort of documentation you have to make submit to DOB to support those changes that you're making to your roof. But check out the Department of Building guidelines for more information on that. And also, when we send around the slides and the DOB information after the program, we include that specific information on the slides as well.
Great. And to jump in terms of the last question, the previous question, what kind of legal agreements? There are two legal agreements. There's a lease agreement for the property owner, and that's a long-term agreement for typically 25 years. And then there is a subscription agreement, which is the discount off of electric bills. So those are two different agreements which need to be in place for a solar developer.
So there's a question here about fixing a building with a 50-year-old roof by repairing the deck and covering with pavers and a green roof. So if you are replacing the entire roof deck, likely you're covered by this law, or local law 9294, and have to undertake the assessment as to the slope of the roof, and what your sustainable roofing zone is, what sort of kind of coverage you have on the existing roof in terms of setbacks and other rooftop structures, and then go through the analysis that Rob articulated as to whether you have to have solar versus a green roof, or whether you have an option based on the slope of the roof, the kind of contiguous area, and the amount of solar that you might be able to produce. So it's hard to say right off the bat whether 50% pavers and 50% green roof would comply with the law.
If those pavers are for recreational space or communal space, then they would, right? Because there's an exemption for recreational space in the law. Couple other questions. For third-party finance, this is a good one. For third-party finance projects, do you see these combined with energy as a service to also increase energy efficiency in the building at the same time, or more standalone? Right now, solar is really its own structure, and it can be at times more straightforward to finance, because solar is taking advantage of tax credits and a very particular tax credit system. There's a very particular incentive structure, so it's become very specialized. So right now, what we're seeing is that the solar world has integrated with your ESCO for energy efficiency sector at this point in time, right? Both are very complex. Both have their own sets of development and incentives, and combining the two, we're not really seeing one-stop shops doing that. A couple questions I think we can combine. Are new sources of financing expected to emerge for non-affordable multi-tenant buildings to meet local law 97? And another question, is it possible to receive a PACE financing for rooftop retrofit projects? So one partially answers the other. PACE, Property Assessed Clean Energy, is a loan against the property tax bill with the understanding that the savings should be greater than the value of the loan, so it's cash flow positive. PACE is expected to be in place at this point sometime this year. administered by NYC, New York City Energy Efficiency Corporation. So that is one promising source of financing for a project which will be funded by a property owner. That's new.
And that does cover the rooftop work as well as energy efficiency upgrades for any sort of local law 97 compliance that you're doing. And on that point, NYSERDA is kind of rolling out new programs or working on new programs all the time to help with local law 97 compliance, including for commercial tenants as well as building owners. Con Ed has also gotten approved for a lot more money to roll out various programs on this. So it's something to stay tuned with, because there's definitely a lot more financing opportunities that will become available for all of this kind of work. And to get back to one of the earlier questions as to kind of why there's a focus on what's going on in our rooftops at this point, I think there's just an overall focus in the city, and certainly in New York State generally, to meet very aggressive carbon reduction requirements and goals to install a lot more renewables in the city. So I think the thinking at this point is kind of, it's like all hands on deck. If you've got a usable roof space, it should be functioning to increase development of renewable resources and advance energy efficiency for your building. So it's exciting that there's more and more financing options to help everybody accommodate those pretty stringent requirements and goals.
And along the same vein, the Public Service Commission last month approved $573 million specifically for solar in New York State, and more than 100 million of that for impacting low and moderate income households. So a tremendous investment at the state level that can help property owners to comply with these local laws. So we can expect additional programs to continue to provide support, or provide even greater support for solar specifically. One more question. We're running out of time here. What are the common issues you've seen when including solar with buildings that have historical requirements and/or tax credits? A project that is visible from the street on an historic building, a solar project must, or solar or green roof, must go through the Historic Preservation Commission in order to be approved. So on the regulatory side, and then in terms of historic tax credits, it is possible to double dip your historic tax credits and your solar tax credits. So some real opportunities with respect to designated historical buildings. Well,
so you can go ahead.
This has been a really great virtual discussion with fantastic questions, really diverse questions, and a diverse set of professionals and advocates in the virtual room. The only regret that I have is that we're not in the same physical room, because there's a really great community here. So we want to thank you for your participation. We want to keep the conversation going. We'll continue with these webinars, eventually in-person seminars once that's a safe thing to do. We will follow up with a video recording, which you may, if you want to watch the whole thing again, if you missed something, then it's there. But we'll also have the slides, so you can have that as a base of reference or forward it to others who you may think would find this of value. Otherwise, feel free to reach out. We're really excited to keep the conversation going and answer any additional questions which you may have.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good morning.